My name is Scott Morangello, and I'm an associate professor and chair of the Department of Catholic Studies here at DePaul. I think I get time off purgatory for being chair. It's my privilege to welcome you all to the 6th annual Berrigan-McAlister Award, and it's by far the biggest in-person turnout. We're honored to have our awardee, Kathy Kelly, here, who's my new best friend. She and I are connected both to the soup kitchen at St. Thomas of Canterbury in Uptown, and to have dear friends at the New York Catholic Workhouse, which we all just figured out in the last 15 minutes. My colleague, Mike Buddy, who's the real brains behind the operation, will introduce Kathy more properly in a bit, but it falls to me to say a bit about this award. About 7 years ago, Mike Buddy asked a few of us throughout the university to help him think through an award that would honor the work of those people who had dedicated their lives to the principles of gospel nonviolence. The lives of Father Daniel Berrigan of the Society of Jesus, of Phil Berrigan, and of Elizabeth McAlister were the touchstones of such a witness in our own time. Daniel Berrigan occasionally taught classes at DePaul, and our library is fortunate to have many of the papers of Dan, Phil, and Liz. My colleague, Morgan McIntosh-Hodges, will say more about that in a bit. Daniel Berrigan passed away in 2016, and Phil Berrigan died in 2002. Liz McAlister is still very much alive. Our first honorees in 2021 were the Kings Bay Plowshares 7, a group of 7 Catholic peace activists who broke into the Kings Bay Naval Submarine Base in 2018 and carried out a symbolic act of protest against nuclear weapons. McAlister was one of those 7. Today, McAlister lives at Jonah House, a faith-based community in Baltimore, Maryland, that lives out nonviolence and justice. Phil and Liz had 3 children, Frida, Jerry, and Kate, all of whom have been active in Catholic nonviolence, and all of whom, Liz, Frida, Jerry, and Kate, have all been extremely helpful to us in setting up this award and have been consulting with us since we started. Other awardees have included the Precious Blood Ministry of Reconciliation here in Chicago. I can assure you my class is just like this. I say a few things, people start cheering. It's like very... It's the bow tie. More Chapel Roan references in class. The East African peace activist Elizabeth Kanini-Kanau in 2023, the Los Angeles Catholic Worker in 2024, and Palestinian Christian peace activist Omar Harami in 2025. As a committee, the award has tried to honor people from Chicago, from the United States at large, and then from the world, and we're grateful that tonight we get to honor a fellow Chicagoan. Before I turn the program over to Morgan, I'd like to screen the trailer for a movie made about the Berrigans and McAlister called Devout and Dangerous. Now I'd like to introduce Morgan, who will talk to us about the special collections devoted to the Berrigans and Liz McAlister here at DePaul Library.
Thank you, Scott. Good evening. My name is Morgan McIntosh-Hodges, and I am an archivist here at DePaul Special Collections and Archives. And in our department, we work to collect, preserve, and provide access to primary source materials in support of teaching, learning, and research. Our collections document the history of our university, the life and legacy of St. Vincent de Paul, as well as community organizations and individuals who work for social justice. In the 1990s, Robert Ludwig, the then director of the university ministry, invited Father Daniel Berrigan to teach courses and lecture at DePaul as a visiting professor. Bob also coordinated spring break service experiences at Jonah House in Baltimore, Maryland, so DePaul students could learn from Phil and Liz and a community dedicated to nonviolent protest actions. And then Bob also initiated the discussions to preserve the Berrigan archives at DePaul. The three unique archival collections that we hold, the Philip Berrigan and Elizabeth McAlister papers, the Jerome C. Berrigan papers, and the Daniel Berrigan papers, preserve the stories and voices of the family, as well as their strong network of friends, colleagues, and supporters. The breadth and depth of these materials serve as sources for those researching peace activism, and the Berrigans, including the documentary filmmaker who used some of our materials for that work. During the class sessions and individual study, students read letters written by Phil, Dan, and Liz to friends and family while they were incarcerated for their peace actions against war and nuclear weapons. Through these documents in the archives, which are deeply personal, DePaul students connect humanity with history. And this is precisely the goal Bob Ludwig envisioned when he worked to make the connection between the Berrigan family and DePaul Special Collections and Archives. Through these connections with the past, coupled with opportunities to spend time with the recipients of the Berrigan-McAlister Award, now we have 6, DePaul students develop ideas about how to challenge harmful practices and integrate peace and justice activism in their own communities. This past Friday, I'm delighted to report that the history department here at DePaul hosted their annual student conference, and the paper written by a student, Lola Nakashimi Brooke, titled Radical Catholic Pacifism, Daniel Berrigan and the American Catholic Left, was awarded Best Paper in the History Department Undergraduate Methods course. I was able to attend Lola's presentation about her research, and she shared that she chose Daniel Berrigan as her topic because she wanted to understand how religion can be a motivating factor behind activism. And sources from the Jerome C. Berrigan archives provided key evidence for her paper. So we're very delighted for that. Lola couldn't be here tonight, but we're happy to report that as growth in the interest of this topic with our current students. So thank you so much for listening to me about our collections at DePaul, and they're open to the public. They're not necessarily need to be a member of the DePaul community to come and access our materials at the Richardson Library.
And now I'd like to introduce my good friend, Mike Buddy, professor of Catholic Studies and Political Science, but we don't worry about the political science stuff too much, here at DePaul, who will introduce Kathy.
Thank you all very much. Pardon my cold. I promise not to kiss any of you. I believe I first met Kathy Kelly roughly 40 years ago. It was somewhere in the western suburbs of Chicago, and it was somewhere around 2 o'clock in the morning. Kathy had assembled a group of people with the aim of impeding the deployment of Illinois National Guard troops to Honduras, where they were to assist the construction of military infrastructure vital to U.S. military operations throughout Central America. Somehow, Kathy had procured a junk car, which she intended to use to block a highway entrance ramp as part of the effort. It was a memorable first impression. The next time I saw her, I believe, was a few years later in the late summer heat of Columbus, Georgia. I had just moved to nearby Auburn University to become a professor, while Kathy and some other hardy souls, including Father Roy Bourgeois, like Kathy, another larger-than-life yet down-to-earth character, were conducting a water-only fast outside the School of the Americas military training facility at Fort Benning, Georgia. My wife Terry was a registered nurse who came to check the fasters' blood pressures and overall condition while they continued to sweat away pounds in health in an effort to draw attention to the facility's ongoing role in training leaders of death squads across Latin America. A weeks-long water-only fast in the heat of South Georgia at the gates of a hostile military base. That made for a memorable second impression. By now, you may be noticing something of a pattern. For well over 40 years, Kathy Kelly has put herself close to the pain of the world. She has defied and confronted the perpetrators of pain at great personal cost. Protests, petitions, arrests, imprisonment, lectures, mobilizations, one-on-one moments of teaching and encouragement and consolation, and much more. She has put herself alongside those who suffer pain inflicted by the powerful, among civilians, especially women and children, under bombardment from American airstrikes in Iraq or facing settler and state violence, including blockades in Palestine, and among the victims of military aggression in Afghanistan, Central America, and many other places. As I said, Kathy has a way of making memorable impressions on people, but focusing only on the dramatic, the daring, and the explicitly political misses all the other ways that Kathy has brought the spirit of love and forgiveness into the world. I have seen her quietly at prayer in a Catholic church that for a time was a safe place for religious peace actors until a change in parish leadership pushed them away. I have seen her many times talking with students here at DePaul University. She's been here countless times, usually for free. We should have put her on the payroll. Talking to students about how nonviolence rooted in love and community provides a life-giving way to navigate a world that often preys upon the vulnerable. It's probably worth mentioning that this isn't DePaul's first attempt to honor Kathy with an award named after the Berrigans. About 30 years ago, we attempted to institute the Daniel Berrigan Award, which we awarded one time before the initiative failed. The person who started it got fired, and it went by the wayside. Kathy was one of 3 people honored with that initial ill-fated attempt. The other 2 were friends of Kathy's, the late John Wancho Donahue, a large ex-priest who ran the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless and who often found himself wrestling matches with multiple Chicago police officers. Wancho was nonviolent, them not so much. The other honoree was the late Gene Stolzfus, a longtime Mennonite practitioner of nonviolence. My most vivid recollection of Gene was of him in a Santa suit being wrestled to the ground in the affluent Water Tower Place Mall during a Christmas protest against U.S. policy in Central America. A very well-dressed woman with her child in tow screamed at Gene, "You bastard, you ruined Christmas." So you see, you can see that Kathy is both part of a community of people who seek justice and reconciliation through nonviolence, often at great personal cost. She's not been afraid to stand on her own, but she is also part of a great chain of friends. Community and nonviolence go together, and Kathy has taught people for years how to be a good leader and a supportive team player. She's reluctant to accept attention for her own role in things, given her lifelong conviction that we need one another to do things worth doing. Whether it's Voices in the Wilderness or Voices for Creative Nonviolence, World Beyond War, or any of the many other groups that Kathy has initiated or joined, all of this is a communal venture or it is nothing at all. The sense of being for and building with one another was recently reinforced by Frida Berrigan, the daughter of Phil and Liz McAlister, who reacted to news of our selection with hearty approval for someone she considers a dear comrade of her parents, as well as a mentor to her and many others. One of the problems with celebrating the life and times of Kathy is there's just too much more to tell. There are her efforts to break the embargo on humanitarian supplies to Iraq in the 1990s, her resistance to the U.S. attack on Iraq in 2003, which saw her living with families in Iraq while U.S. planes dropped bombs from the sky. There are the anti-nuclear weapons protests, one of which cost her 18 months in prison. There's a refusal to pay war taxes to support the imperial war machine, which required her to keep her income below the taxable minimum. There are the 60-plus times she's been arrested for breaking laws that protect the killing machine and killed vulnerable. There are the flotillas for bringing life's essentials to people in Gaza. They're standing alongside women in rural Afghanistan during the worst of the U.S. wars there. It's hard to believe that one person could cram so much into one lifetime, but such has been Kathy's path. Fortunately for the rest of us, there is a new book to be published next year by Orbis Press about the life and times of Kathy Kelly. It's entitled Catching Courage, written by Frank Fromhertz, and I'm looking forward to its release in 2027. Kathy is a natural teacher, having started out as such in Chicago's Catholic schools early in her career. Just as she has sought to discern the way of Christ for herself in a violent world, she has encouraged others to find their path as well, to make a new path if necessary, and to experience the empowerment that comes from building communities of kindred spirits along the way. Having had the pleasure of hosting Kathy in my classrooms more than once, I've seen what kind words joined to strength of character can spark and inspire. Kathy can talk the talk because she has walked the walk. She has walked to Chicago and to the farthest corners of the world, often with a child's hand in hers, and always with a sense of direction, even when the days are overcast. We're grateful that her path has led her back to us here tonight. And please join me in welcoming Kathy Kelly and presenting her the 2006 Berrigan-McAlister.
Well, surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, it's wonderful to feel a well of gratitude, looking at your faces, knowing of all the goodness concentrated in this room, and knowing that the Berrigan legacy, the McAlister legacy, is certainly being embraced. So I want to thank every person on the committee that put this event together. They've organized so well. I'm grateful to each teacher that invited me to their classes and to the students in the classes like Amalia. I'm very sure that everybody could bill me for therapy. I remember, my sister and brother and sister-in-law are here, but I guess I was kind of late learning how to talk. And I think the neighbors were suggesting to my mother, maybe you better take her to see someone. And then I remember my mother had said, and once you started talking, you never stopped. And it was very hard for me because I was home with you all alone. So I don't so easily have an off switch, and the clock is behind me. So when somebody give me the signal when it's like after 35 minutes. Yeah, right. So I worked at Bert's shoe store when I was in high school. And if I managed to get on the Archer Avenue Express bus, I could make it to downtown 15 or 20 minutes before I had to be at Bert's shoe store being a clerk. And then I could go into St. Benet's bookstore. And that was like a little paradise for me because the women who ran it, they were very lefty and progressive, and they had banners and greeting cards and books and pamphlets all about the Berrigans. And I was just gobsmacked by these two Catholic priests in their collars who would take such very audacious acts. And so there you have Dan and Phil and Brother David Darst in the Christian Brother collar, and George Mischie and the Tom Lewis and the Mulholland couple and Nancy Moylan. And they look kind of ordinary, don't they? And of course, they're very, very extraordinary people. And so I became very enamored with the Berrigans. And as was mentioned in the wonderful trailer that we saw, they, grabbed the draft files out of Catonsville Selective Service, and they had their homemade napalm. I guess they made it with jelly and something else, doused the files, set them ablaze as the cameras were clicking and the police were closing in. And they got between 2 and 3.5 years in prison for that action. And I'm just going to wander over here and reacquaint myself with my notes that I left. I keep thinking 10 years from now, they're going to be putting me in a corner and saying, but anyway, what I wanted to share with you is what Dan Berrigan said on that day, because it's such an amazing quote. And I happened to be at his funeral This was at St. Francis Xavier Church in May of 2016. And Liz McAlister went to the pulpit. And I mean, the church was packed. There were over 800 people there. And Liz read these words: "Our apologies, good friends, for the fracture of good order." This is what he said as this was happening. "For the burning of paper instead of children, the angering of the orderlies in the front parlor of the charnel house. We could not do otherwise, so help us God. We could not do otherwise, so help us God." And Dan Berrigan is somebody who chose his words very carefully. And it's interesting that he talks about the fracture, because Dan and Phil and Liz were all about unifying people. They said, don't get into these actions unless you are building a community. And the community joins together for many retreats and many meetings and does research. And they weren't about fracturing, but when it came to issues of whether or not to kill, they were immovable. I mean, another quote from Dan, I used to put this one on banners. It took a long time to make those banners and cut out all the film, because this one said, "He rebuked the wind, and there came a great calm. A calm always follows, or almost always. A question and then an answer. A storm and then a miracle, sometimes, but not always." And that was the Dan Berrigan who wasn't sure he had all the answers. And I think we humbly and in a way meekly have to join in that spirit as well. But when it came to killing, killing is never okay. That was the message again and again, not in war, not in preparation for war, not in the issue of abortion in their view, not in the issue of any kind of genocide. They were so firm and clear on that, and immovable in that deep, deep faith. So we are challenged by the Berrigans, certainly at our time right now. Well, in St. Thomas Canterbury Parish, and I was so pleased because I met Walker, who's now in charge of the soup kitchen at St. Thomas. And that was sort of finishing school for a lot of us in some ways. I'd been fired 3 times as a waitress, so when they took me, they can't fire me. And the soup kitchen was a wonderful community. And out of that community, well, amazing things grew. And, I don't want to say we were cocky, but we thought we can do things. And we did. And it was clear that the Pledge of Resistance was terrifically important. Ken Berrigan had done so much to organize it across the United States. And we would take the pledge and go to meetings after meetings and do actions like trying to get a car to block off the road. I mean, I don't even know how to drive a car. How did I get that car? There were also many, many actions to try to stop the School of the Americas, to try to prevent what was going on there. But I do want to mention something about that kind of action, because this is the Reverend Roy Bourgeois. And Roy was so charismatic. The first time I met him, people were clustered around him, and it was my night to wrap up at the soup kitchen. And I was teaching at St. Ignatius, and I had to write the quiz for the next morning. And let's get this show on the road. And everybody's talking to this new priest with a charming Southern accent. And then he turned to me and he said, "Hi, I'm Roy Bourgeois." And I said, "Yeah, and I'm Kathy Capitalist. Did you want to do the urinals or the floors?" But then I realized everybody loved Roy, and so did I. He was so courageous and so charismatic, and yet down to earth. And people came by the thousands eventually. Wasn't it up to 14,000 to the School of the Americas? And so many people helped to organize that. And this was Roy holding a cross commemorating someone who had been killed by a death squad or some kind of a tortuous agency. But the United States was often funding, and Roy was very focused. But Roy believed there are no second-class citizens, And he spoke up saying women ought to be ordained as priests if they want it. Bye, Roy. He was dismissed from the Maryknoll religious order. So there's a reason why my friend Brad Wolf, who was very, very welcomed by Morgan and people at the library, wrote this edited collection of Phil Berrigan's writings and gave it a title, A Ministry of Risk. There are risks to this kind of activity. And I think about Francesca Albanese right now. I mean, she's at risk, and they've punished her by taking away credit cards. It makes it really hard for her to do even basic banking internationally because she's the UN rapporteur for human rights, and she's doing what any person dedicated to human rights would do. She's naming what is happening, and I want to name it too and say it is a genocide, and it's on our watch. And so there is a risk, and I also want to encourage everybody in this room to bless and thank Norman Finkelstein. He's still in New York. He's still writing and speaking, the son of Holocaust survivors. And I remember he equipped a number of us who had gone over to Lebanon with a list of the massacres because he was that kind of a researcher. And he's made that sort of a difference in the lives of so many people. But he also experienced being shunned. And so I don't want to discourage anybody, especially with two seniors right here in front of me. Don't be discouraged, but sometimes there are risks, and it's good to know when to take the risk. Getting ready for this talk, I started digging, and I went back to a trial in Ireland when 5 of my friends were on trial for doing $2.5 million worth of damage to a U.S. Navy warplane parked on the tarmac after I had given a retreat. The Sisters of St. Bridget had called me and said, Kathy, you'll be coming to Ireland now, won't you? And I said, oh, no, I'm in Baghdad. We're staying. It was right before the 2003 war, and I had no intention of leaving, but I just didn't know how to say no to the Sisters of St. Bridget of Kildare, Ireland. So I went, and I brought with me photos that we took quite often. These are the photos, really. And at this point, Jerry Zawada and I and Cynthia Bannister and Peggy Gish and Sister Virginie Lovinger are at the border between Kuwait and Iraq. And it's right before the 2003 shock and awe bombing. And we would take these photos of some of the most beautiful children you could ever meet in your life. And we'd enlarge them and put them on vinyl and then string them in between trees or posts outside of universities and hospitals and bridges and electrical facilities. And we'd say to bomb this site would be a war crime. So we took them down to the border, and then there was a big dust storm, and we had planned to do a week-long vigil, but we all had our mouths full of sand, and actually we didn't stay there that long. But then we took those photos, and it's amazing how community builds. We strung them on the balcony of the Al-Fanar Hotel with big signs that I know Dan and Phil and Liz would approve of. Life is sacred. Courage for peace, not for war. And so when the U.S. Marines arrived in Baghdad, much to my amazement, they set up a checkpoint right outside of our hotel. And so those are the Marines, and I think they were looking up at us and wondering, where's their spaceship? And we were looking down at them and thinking, well, they do look kind of thirsty. So we went down with water and gave the newly arrived Marines water to drink. And I had a box of dates under my bed. I pulled that out too. And we had many, many conversations with them. It was an odd community that formed, I have to say, a very strange community. But that's where I think Dan Berrigan sometimes, but not always, we ought not harden our imaginations about what can form, but also recognize there are risks. I guess I was interested in risk takers from a pretty young age. Our parents were both in London in World War II. And I was curious about World War II, but honestly, I had no idea about concentration camps until in high school. Brother Conrad, a Christian brother, decided to show all of us a film called Night and Fog. And Bob saw it when he was at Quigley. That's Bob, my spouse over there. And both of us had the same reaction. It was just a game changer. Because these French artist historians had gone into the prisons after actually the Soviet Union had released the prisoners by breaking into the prisons. It's so hard to say liberated when there's so much trauma. And you saw the rolls of blankets made out of human hair, and the lampshades and drawing paper made from human skin. Nothing was wasted. And in French language, we read the subtitles, and the narrator talked about the crematoria and the smokestack and the ashes that would be spewed. And I thought this was in the film, but when I saw it later, it was my own imagination. The question, didn't they smell the burning flesh? And I guess it was as though somehow in a groove of my own emotional makeup, I felt like I could never be a spectator in the face of some unspeakable evil. My friends, I went through the Vietnam War like Brigadoon in the mist. I didn't pass out a flyer. I didn't call a congressperson. I didn't take action. I cried over the New York Times. I wrote my papers, but I was longing. And when we think about prayer, I think about longing. And that longing is so, so important for guiding us. So when I finally landed at the soup kitchen, Walker, in Uptown, it was with a huge sense of relief because I was surrounded by people who had that same longing and a ton of energy, and a lot of good things happened out of that. But it wasn't until later, this is a slide that is right from the film Night and Fog that shows the people behind the barbed wire suffering all manner of atrocities. Whoops. I'm going the wrong way. There. Later, I learned about Hans and Sophie Scholl. And, you know, when the Catholic Worker opened in Rogers Park, it was named after these two. Hans and Sophie Scholl were part of the Hitler Youth, and their father was so upset. Their dad said, "Don't you see your neighbors down the street, your Jewish neighbors, what the Gestapo would do to them? You've got to get out of that organization. No more of this." Well, they not only left Hitler Youth, they, with astonishing courage, formed what they called the White Rose. And the White Rose Collective would try to get leaflets that they produced at great risk. Every one of them headlined, "We will not be silent." They'd pack their briefcases with leaflets and go to other universities in Germany and distribute them, or they'd mail them out. And Hans would go out late at night, just reckless courage in a way, with a bucket of paint and a brush and paint slogans on the walls. The Gestapo were closing in on them. They were at their own university in 1943. They had distributed decks of the leaflets on the banisters of each flight in the 4-story hall, and then they had a lot left over. And Sophie impetuously put them on the top floor ledge, pushed them. They fluttered down as the students were changing classes. A custodian saw her do it. The Gestapo arrested them, and they were tried. And 3 days later, after they had been convicted, Hans and Sophie were taken to the guillotine. Now, Hans and Sophie are known in Europe. Buildings and halls are named after them. If you have any relatives in Germany or beyond, and you ask them, "Do you know who Hans and Sophie Scholl are?" I'm willing to bet the answer will be yes. And of course, Jerica did her best to make them known here in the Chicago area. But I want to say with great conviction that the counterpart to Hans and Sophie Scholl are the enormously courageous press people in Gaza, in Lebanon, in the West Bank. These young people who put on the helmets and the bulletproof vests, they have also said, "We will not be silent." And in doing so, they're putting their lives on the line. And so it's spreading now. There are over 260 journalists who've been killed, Palestinian journalists in the West Bank and Gaza. And it's so systematic. And my friends, we have to take this really, really seriously. How is it so systematic for the military in the Israeli Defense Forces to be able to identify who the persons are who have witnessed these atrocities? Well, they're using the technology that is being supplied by many of the AI and the top tech companies, Palantir and possibly, I mean, some Google people are saying, we don't want to do this anymore. They're using that technology, but the United States military is now mimicking programs like Lavender and Hasbara. And it means that they clean people's cell phones, they clean social media, and it can be turned against other people very easily. So this little boy, Mohammed al-Baradwil, was with his father, a doctor, in Rafah in Gaza. And the dad was a very good doctor, but he had a passion. He loved to go fishing. And so he had taken Muhammad early in the morning out to the shore. They had a boat. They were going fishing, but they came upon what has to be called a massacre. Israeli forces had fired on a group of people who were possibly alive but buried under the rubble. And so a convoy of emergency technical workers, healthcare professionals, ambulances, well-marked cars, lights going. It was very early in the morning, but the Israeli Defense Forces fired on that convoy. Later, the forensics experts said 300 bullets were fired, and the bullets went into the torsos and the heads of the 15 medical workers who were killed. Well, Muhammad al-Baradwil was 12 years old. His father, the doctor, and another passerby were told down on the ground. They were handcuffed, blindfolded, but the soldiers didn't blindfold young Muhammad. He's only 12. So he saw the whole massacre. That was on March 28th in 2024. Investigators, realizing that he was an eyewitness, came to him and they started to ask questions. So on May 10th, Muhammad and his father were out in the fishing boat, and an Israeli Navy ship fired and assassinated young Muhammad. How systematic is it? Any witness is at risk. And this is now happening in Lebanon as well. I believe there have been at least 11 journalists killed in Lebanon, including Fatima Fatouni and her brother Muhammad. And they had just filmed a clash between Hezbollah and the Israeli military. And, you know, that sort of thing should be covered by media. And they were killed in their car immediately after they had filed that story. So it's systematic. And the other group of people greatly at risk because they've witnessed atrocities are the healthcare workers. And so in a way, my friends, this is a picture of hope. This picture was taken on December 25th, 2025, and 168 Palestinian medical students are conferred with their medical degree, and they had risked their lives during the 2 last years of their studies. They had been at risk of being assassinated, tortured, maimed, imprisoned, of their whole families being erased, but they kept at it. They really earned that degree, and they were resolved to keep on with their studies. And they're standing in front of the main building of the Al-Shifa Medical Complex, and it's obviously destroyed. And so the healthcare becomes more and more elusive while people are getting more and more ill. And I think this is in the name of extending greater Israel. And this is what genocides try to do. And as our attraction gets, in a sense, fractured, because there are so many wars, Phil Berrigan said it's like a many-headed Hydra monster. You cut off one head and a new one pops up. or, trying to put out a brush fire. One goes out, a new one starts up. I know, dear friends, it's a confusing and difficult time. But maybe we're in this time now for a reason. Maybe there's a reason for each of us to be living in this time now and bringing our strength and our goodness and our vision and praying for the leaders. I mean it. We have to pray for every mayor. We have to long and yearn for every university official, every parish official to catch the courage of Pope Francis, catch the courage of Pope Leo, and they're taking risks too, and catch the courage of Cardinal Cupich and Cardinal McElroy and Cardinal Tobin. The time is ripe to speak up, to take risks. But that ministry of risk, which is so emblematic of those doctors, is requiring a great deal of people. I think about this kind of iconic photo. Dr. Hussam Abu Safia was a renowned pediatrician, a neonatologist. He was the director of the Kamal Adwan Hospital. And the Israelis told him, cut that hospital out, close it down. And he said, we're the only hospital left for all of northern Gaza. We can't shut down. Who will treat the patients? So he kept going. And the Israelis kept bombing parts of the hospital. And then his son was in a building just outside the hospital grounds. They assassinated his son. And then they said, are you going to leave now? And he said, no, I will stay near where my son is buried. And he kept on trying to stay, but then there was really no hospital left to stay with. And so he was told to turn himself in. And there he is in his white coat, walking toward not one but two tanks. And that was December 24th, 2024. Today marks his 500th day in prison. Solitary confinement, regular beatings, scabies, heart trouble that's not being seen to, hasn't seen his family. Why punish this man? So we're so lucky that we have doctors against genocide and priests against genocide and growing groups saying, we will not be silent. And this is David Solnitz's poster, and he's also got one that says to bomb this site would be a war crime. So who are the terrorists? So many times people have shown us pictures of their children, and one mother in Lebanon showed us a picture of her beautiful daughter, Zara, and she'd just been killed by one of these bunker buster bombs that the United States had gotten to the Israelis, and she had been sending little Zara to a shelter that she was assured was a secure shelter. But she didn't know that the United States had gotten the bunker buster to the Israelis, and her little Zara, her body was immaculate when the rescuers pulled her out from the rubble. What killed her and her little cousin was that the force of the explosion imploded their internal organs. And the mother tapped the plastic over the frame of her picture. And then she was wincing. She had a medical hood and a neck brace, and she pointed upward, and she said, didn't they know? Didn't they see? My Zahra, just I take her so she'd be safe at night in this building. And then every morning she runs to me. I pick her up. I give her breakfast. Didn't they see? And to be honest, I didn't know who she meant. But now I understand. She was pointing to the drones overhead. Didn't they know? Didn't they see? And then she had her son bring us a picture of a little girl with large saucer eyes and tousled hair. And you could imagine a smile breaking out across her beautiful face. And she tapped the plastic on the picture and asked me, is she the terrorist? Who is the terrorist? And so I think of these kids in Afghanistan. Little Sakina's got her yellow-handled hammer, and they had collected as many toy guns as they could. And they're doing a plowshares action, right? They're smashing the guns to smithereens. And they were so earnest. Then they buried the guns in a grave, and then they planted a tree on top of it. And these are child laborers. These are the kids who could be victim A of human traffickers as they grow older, and they're not just the cute little kids selling chewing gum. These are the kids who are illiterate because they can't go to school because they're the main support of their families. And do you know how much money the United States spent per soldier per year at the height of the surge? $2 million. $2 million per soldier per year. And these kids knew hunger and they knew cold. But my young friends were trying their best to share resources, to live simply. They knew who the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was. They knew who the Berrigans were. They invited Mairead Maguire and she came. So are these kids the terrorists? Of course not. But they're the ones who've suffered family separations, loss, the night raids, these rounding up of people who were sent to Guantanamo, the corruption within their society. And they now say Kabul will be out of water by 2030. So I think about that beautiful phrase from the book of Isaiah, when shall come the day when they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift the sword against nation, neither shall they continue to learn the ways of war any longer. And that's the phrase, that's the line that must be our kind of guiding moral compass and principle. No more wars, no more weapons. And Boeing and Lockheed Martin and Raytheon and General Atomics, they have to know that they could change, they could make a difference, and they should. And some of their workers, there's a wonderful article from a recent Tucson paper, some of their workers have quit since the U.S. bombing of Manab in Iran. They said, this is it. I can't do this any longer. And apparently, Shane Claiborne and others that have done the Good Friday actions at Lockheed Martin are in touch with some others who are saying, maybe I don't want to do this anymore. And so for students, the chance to really cultivate in your communities the assurance that you're not going to serve, the scriptures say you can't serve both God and mammon, you're not going to serve the merchants of death. And that takes community. It takes sometimes risk. And it takes, I think, a lot of longing to know when it's the right time to take action. What's actually buried under the ground in Afghanistan, of course, are so many unexploded ordnance pieces. This is Paul Seaworthy's wonderful photography at work exploring that. And people are going to be dealing with this unexploded ordnance and the fiber optics from the drones and the contaminated rubble and all the many fallouts and environmental disasters from making war. Why would we want to continue this? And I was quite aware that there were tunnels under Gaza. I was there in 2009, again in 2013. Some of the tunnels had trains, diapers and foodstuffs came in, but yes, weapons also. But if you were going to send the weapons that the U.S. has given to Israel through a tunnel, it'd have to be pretty gosh darn big. Caterpillar bulldozers, F-16 planes, F-15 planes, Apache helicopters, Hellfire missiles, 500-pound bombs, 2,000-pound bombs, so many tank-fired missiles. And who benefits? Well, again, the ones who are making so much money don't want to see it end. It's a bit like the people who run the prisons thinking, holy cow, what if we've got all these empty beds? How are we going to keep the prisons going? And so what drives what? And again, people can change. This is the Negev Desert, and buried underneath the Negev Desert is the nuclear weapon production facility. We're not sure where all the nuclear weapons are. The CIA says that Israel has at least 91 thermonuclear weapons. The number is actually probably more like 200 to 400 thermonuclear weapons. And I mean, there is a double standard, isn't there? We're pounding Iran, and I don't think Iran should have the nuclear weapon. I think every country, every group that is using weapons, killing other people, should be held accountable. but that includes, under international criminal justice law, the fact that Israel doesn't acknowledge their weapons, and so the International Atomic Energy Association cannot research it. And when we chip away at the edifice of international law, it leaves all of us vulnerable to recklessness, to gangsterism. And these are very, very important matters. I actually think this little girl's voice might stir the moral compass of so many people. Heen Drajab. She wanted to be a princess when she grew up. And, you know, she was with her uncle and auntie. The Israelis fired on her family members, killed all of them. She was the last one. And for 2 hours, the emergency medical tech people were trying to get, I mean, it was only an 8-minute drive. They wanted to get the ambulance to save her, but they had to coordinate it with the Israeli military or it would be suicidal. And so they were 156 feet away from her. She was sobbing into the phone, "Please come, I'm so scared." They had managed to patch her mother, Wissam, into conversation with her. But that little girl was killed by more bullets that were fired. But 3 movies have been made about her, and one of them was nominated for an Academy Award. And I believe that little girl's voice, "Please come, I'm so scared," will represent the children who are saying, "Please come, I'm so sick. Please come, I'm so hungry." But we must be the ones who hear. And hear with love. Like, you know, I think of those Columbia students who flung love out the window when they made this banner, and they renamed Hamilton Hall Heen's Hall. And the West Bank violence continues. The works of war and the works of mercy are in a struggle constantly. But the flotilla is like the miracle on the Mediterranean. It's a wonderful thing. And I just want to mention that this is a cartoon from a Soviet publication in 1953 by Yuli Ganf. And I guess the likenesses serving the war are the main heads who survived after World War II, Truman, Winston Churchill, Andrei Plotnoy, and Konrad Adenauer, feeding the resources to war, and healthcare, education, science, and art go without. That little guy at the education table is sitting behind a globe covered by a cobweb. And you kind of wish the people at the tables could sort of get together, you know, a little bit of Jesus in the temple action and turn those tables over. So I am really seriously out of time. So I'm just going to give the last word to a Swedish artist, Inga, who made this Trojan horse. You can see it represents the United States, and the nuclear weapons are inside the Trojan horse. So, dear friends, I have just one more thing I want to mention. The Christian peacemaker teams, now called community peacemaker teams, stayed in Baghdad after it was prudent to leave. Our group left. We were afraid we were endangering our neighbors. We were told by others, you know, you've got to get out of here. They stayed, and 4 of them were taken hostage. They were held for 118 days. Tom Fox was taken and killed. And yearning, we longed for their release. Well, what released them was actually that the Royal Canadian Mounted Police were able to get the information from the cell phones, and they were released. My friend Jim Loney wrote a book called Captivity about those 118 days, and it's a meditation. I strongly recommend it. But he now says he wishes he had entitled the book, "When You Are Free, I Will Be Free," because that's what their captors told them whenever they asked. And at one point, they had the key. The guard had left the key on the table, and they could have gone out through the window. They undid themselves from their chains overnight so they'd have a hope of getting a night's sleep. And then they'd chain themselves back up again in the morning. And they had long discussions. Should we or shouldn't we try to go out the window? Should we try to escape? And it must have been kind of agonizing to have those discussions. And I think we have the key. We have it. And I just want to drop this date on your calendars. May Day, 2028, the United auto workers and other major unions have said they will work toward that date for a general strike. Phil Berrigan loved the idea of a general strike. Let's work toward May Day. It's the right thing to say. Thank you very, very much. Sure, if there's time for it.
Yeah. So where you sit at the, yeah. So we have some time for questions. Maybe Kathy can sit there and I'll, like Donahue style, bring the microphone to people. So it's what? 7:39 now. Yeah.
Oh, the microphone. Okay. I was wondering, you talked a lot about how you grew up because you went to my class, and you talked about how it was told to not really stir the pot or know what violence is, but not really make yourself known. And your legacy is amazing. And I want to know, what was one of the first most impactful events that you participated in that started your work in nonviolence?
Well, thank you, Amalia, for that question. Well, going to that soup kitchen was very, very impactful for me. When we decided to plant corn on top of nuclear missile silo sites, that occasioned quite a lot of learning. I'm going to stand up if it's okay. I feel kind of short. And maybe I can just say that the county jails are unsupervised. And I think that's the roughest jail time people can do when they're inside a county jail. And I know that some of you at DePaul have gone through the Inside Out program and been in great solidarity. And really, that was my finishing school. I was in a Missouri county jail, and I mean, they didn't give us toilet paper, paper towel, decent food. It was like a dungeon almost. And Mr. Nick, who was in charge, he was right out of Central Casting. You know, he had the Hawaiian shirt that he couldn't button over his belly, and he always wanted to clean his glasses for him, and slicked back hair. And well, a woman came in with a DUI, and she was released that weekend. And as she was going out, I said, could we have your newspaper? And she was so generous. She said, oh, honey, that's yesterday's newspaper. I'll get today's sent right in. I said, well, actually, we used the newspaper for toilet paper. And she went out and slapped a lawsuit on the Cass County Jail because they didn't meet the prisoner's basic needs. And so Major Nick came bursting into the jail cell. Which one of you all had the nerve to say that we do not give you toilet paper? And the other women said, it must have been Missiles. That was my nickname. She thinks she's living in some kind of hotel. And so he polled each person, and they all said, yes, Major Nick, you take good care of us. And I thought, I am in a circus or something. This isn't possible. And so when it came to me, I said, you don't give us toilet paper. We don't get sanitary napkins. Our food is slop. There's so much corruption in this jail. You shouldn't be running a kennel for dogs, much less a place where people live. And I'm thinking, you know, that's going to bring silence. People are sorting their socks, reading their scriptures. I thought, Later, I was in the federal prison, and they're much more regulated, and you get toilet paper. But I was with a woman who didn't like me very much at first, but we became quite good friends. And so back in those days, you could get a big cinnamon roll on a Saturday morning and drink your cup of coffee with us. So Lorraine and I were right there for our cinnamon rolls. And I asked her, you know, can you tell me what was going on that day? And she looked at me like, you know, could anybody be so thick-skulled? And she said to me, Kathy, honey, you didn't have anything to lose. Could you think about what the Major Nick could have made sure a woman didn't get her good time? He could have made sure she didn't see a chaplain, didn't see a lawyer, didn't get translation, couldn't fix herself up a bit before she went to her prison or her court date. He had so much power over those women. And she said, baby, you didn't have anything to lose. And so when you don't have so much to lose, that's when you're, I guess, maybe more responsible to act. So Malia, I learned my lessons in some unexpected places. And my sister Loretta will remember that our mother used to say, oh, no, don't be acting too big for your britches. And wasn't quite sure what that meant, but I knew I didn't want to find out. But when you know that your voice could be raised, and when it feels like the right time, that's a good time to raise your voice. And I think it kind of comes from a sense of responsibility, a sense of urgency, often a longing, maybe call it prayer, and a desire for solidarity with other people who can't always speak. But when the other people can speak, let their voices be heard front and center. Other questions? I don't have an off switch. Ken Berrigan.
Kathy, you may remember we actually met like 40 years ago here at DePaul, where the Pledge of Resistance was having its national convention. And you were as out there then as you are now. So I'm very appreciative that you introduced what resistance means in this time to my students here, first-year students who got to meet you in their first hours at DePaul in Discover Nonviolent Chicago. And it was a powerful experience for all of them. And I think heard from many of them that it was life-changing. So as you may remember, Phil Berrigan once said, some of us are in jail and the rest of us are on probation. And I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Well, I sure have in mind Dowhy O'Crane, who climbed up an airplane on the tarmac of Shannon Airport about 3 weeks ago now, I think, and he did damage. And the news reports said he was unhinged. And he was unhinged from the system. He took a very courageous action. And I felt challenged, you know, how come he just got out on bail? And I hope he gets lawyers as fine as the ones that defended the pit stop plowshares. But that probationary period, you know, I guess we need to turn ourselves into our communities and be accountable to community and try to discern what are the best next steps. And, you know, you don't have to say these are my very, very best friends, but find kindred spirits. Find people who share those longings and desires that you have. But this came from Frank Kelly. If you spread the peanut butter too thin, the bread rips. So be careful, be careful. He did say that to me. Thank you, Mr. Fogarty. Chris. Yeah.
Thank you. Can you hear me? I'm doing this on behalf, my wife has just ordered me. We have noticed that the Iranian demands against Trump continue to demand an end, a ceasefire in Lebanon, but not a ceasefire in Gaza. And there's now a renewed starvation going on in Gaza. And looking around at this lovely crowd here, if every one of us were to both call and write every day this week and next week to our U.S. politicians, Duckworth and Durbin, and whoever your congressman is, we could turn this around in Chicago alone. We've learned, Mary and I have learned over time that politics do work, numbers count. To protect their own livelihoods, they will act for you. And so if everyone here would just do this, and we might save the lives. Right now, they're heading for complete wipeout of the entire population, either removal or murder, and it's up to us to act. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And
also step in saving America.
And Mary says also, if we do not save Gaza, the United States itself will be doomed.
well, thank you. You know, there's also 31 representatives in the Congress who've signed a letter calling on Israel to acknowledge that they have the nuclear weapons. So I wrote to Duckworth and Durbin saying, why don't you start a companion letter in the Senate? That would be an audacity compared to what's gone on so far. So please do think about those letters. Also letters to the editor, phone calls. It's a very, very crucial time.
Thank you so much for sharing. I'm just wondering, in all your life of activism and all the work you've done, how would you gauge the anti-war sentiment among the American people today? And have you seen a kind of qualitative shift in the last few years or decades?
Well, I sure was impressed 2 years ago by the student encampments. I'm so glad that Columbia has made a film called Encampments. And for those who were students who are seniors this year, you have lived through COVID, you've lived through your encampment movement, you've lived through threats and in some ways, I think of repression. But keep writing, keep your diaries, keep thinking. And I think that there are people all across the United States right now who know that they're living in a time when it's not right to look away. I think that we're in a very dramatic time. The flotilla has got people from 75 different countries, and they keep going back again and again, trying to do what the United Nations should do and open up a humanitarian corridor, break the siege. And they've got support from dock workers in Italy. They've got support from people in Spain and France and Brussels. There is a movement happening. And so I think we need to climb aboard that kind of movement. And yes, I do feel disappointment that here in the United States, we are responsible for so much in terms of misery and displacement and starvation and production of weapons. We are complicit, and we have to hold ourselves accountable. So I'm glad you asked that question, but I also want to quote Phil Berrigan. He used to say to people, don't give up. Don't get tired. And he wouldn't. And so I guess maybe the other blunt thing I can say is that on the whole, the militaries of any nation state, for most of us, don't really want our bodies. They don't really want our advice. They want our money. And they get it. And they steal, and they rob, and they thieve. And they use that money for very, very, very bad things. And they make bad investments, and it continues the spiral. So think about ways to withdraw complicity. And that's why I think this general strike idea, if we can get the heft and the solidarity, could be a very good thing to work toward. And to know that we were at DePaul University and we were a group that were like-minded and felt a sense of kinship and togetherness and move that forward. And always, this is so important, to say thank you, to be grateful, grateful, grateful for the goodness that's gone before us. Concetta?
How do we get the Catholic Church to talk like you? Since we're in a Catholic university, because they always try to shut me up, and our Pax Christi groups. Poor Doug.
Well, we did have, if we get everybody in the Catholic Church, Concetta is saying that's a lot of people. But, you know, it's something that Cardinal McElroy, Tobin, and Supich were, you know, 3 people on 60 Minutes, and they were speaking the truth. And Pope Francis spoke the truth. You know, he asked the Congress who would send money And who would send weapons to countries at war? Why would they do that? And then he said, the answer is simple. The answer is money. And the money, it is drenched in blood. So he's a prophet. Pope Leo's not backing away. And so I think, it's a good time to ask the people in the pulpits today, how do you feel about Pope Leo? And to pose those questions, we're in a shifting time, it seems to me. And then, I guess have one another's back. If somebody is being shut out or persecuted, to find ways to be there in support. Now, Concetta, you've worked so hard to stop the construction of detention centers and to be on the right side of so many questions, and you've got a community, and you're not alone. And the Catholic worker, I think, as Doug's cap says, keeps hope alive. Yeah. I wonder if Chris and Sarah and Wendy Clenard could come forward. Can I ask two women in this room to join me up here? Wendy runs a dance studio, and Wendy explained to me the origins of the debka. And the origin of the debka, if I got it right, was that Palestinians needed to stomp on the dirt to create the roofs.
Samir, he's in our studio in residence, and he's all over actually. Right now he's in San Francisco. He has a thing called street debka, and he was explaining like on the roof, they would pound to adhere the mud, and there'd be a series of those, and then also to plant seeds, and so there would be the and you're in a whole line, and the whole it's wonderful. I would say he does it quite regularly. We had a blast, and all shapes and sizes, ages, and it is really in the face of so many things to see everybody moving and smiling. And I also work at Logan Correctional Centers, and we actually had a dance party this last Friday night. So dance is a really powerful thing, especially if you join Kathy Kelly kind of things.
Chris has led people singing politically all over the place, at the School of the Americas in Chicago. And I said, Chris, could you sing Everyone Neath Their Vine and Fig Tree? Because it comes right out of the Plowshares Mandate. And everyone neath their vine and fig tree shall live in peace and unafraid. Nations shall learn war no more. And into plowshares turn their swords. Nations shall learn war no more. So, Chris, could you?
Are we also dancing? Yeah. Let's try singing it first, and then we'll learn a few dance moves, which we did in Daly Plaza on Good Friday, speaking out against Palantir. We ended our very powerful vigil with the Dapka dance. Yeah. And everyone neath the vine and fig tree shall live in peace and unafraid. And everyone neath the vine and fig tree shall live in peace and unafraid. Second part. And into plowshares turn their swords. Nations shall learn war no more. And into plowshares turn their swords. Nations shall learn war no more. And everyone neath the vine and fig tree shall live in peace and unafraid. And everyone neath the vine and fig tree shall live in peace and unafraid. And into plowshares turn their swords. Nations shall learn war no more. And into plowshares turn their swords. Nation shall learn war no more, and everyone neath the vine and fig tree shall live in peace and unafraid. And everyone neath the vine and fig tree shall live in peace and unafraid. And into plowshares turn their swords. Nation shall learn war no more. And into plowshares turn their swords. Nation shall learn war no more.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, let's again thank DePaul for the hospitality. And Scott, thank you for being a wonderful MC.
So just a few last words of thanks. I've written these all down so I don't forget them. It's like the Academy Awards or something. I'd like to thank Brenda Washington and Marlon Aguilar for doing so much of this. To our student workers, Michelle Province and Elliot Ellis, who did more work behind the scenes than we'll ever know. And then I want to thank especially as well the Berrigan-McAlister Committee, Bill Kavanaugh, Susanna Martinez, Mark LeBeau, Stephen Hames, Tom Krenz, Jerica Ahrens, Christy Klimas, Rose Spalding, Mark Potosnik, Craig Mooson, and Ken Berrigan. Also, I want to thank my good friend Mike Buddy, without whom none of this would have occurred. And finally, in a world ever torn by war and disregard for human life, I want to thank again Kathy Kelly for her witness. Thank you all so very much.